What's going on, folks? It's Undead FOIA. Thought I would pop in and do a FOIA training. I've gotten a few requests for it. I've done this a few times now. Try to do it once or twice a year. Usually I try to grab FOIA fan, but it's unavailable tonight. So thought I would kick this off. I think there's more and more interest in FOIA these days. So thought I would put this together, just kind of go through it. Not promising anything, but maybe if you're unfamiliar with FOIA, but you're interested in FOIA, maybe there's something here that will get you interested. If there's anything that I can get across at all, you don't have to be afraid of FOIA. You don't have to be nervous about submitting a FOIA request. It's actually a very simple process, and there's really nothing to be concerned about. I mean, you're going to put in a request. They may or may not quote you a fee, and if you accept the fee, they'll process the documents, and you have options and you have choices every step of the way. So you really don't have to be nervous about it, but I know some people are nervous about it. But FOIA is a very powerful tool. It's present, it's available really anywhere, certainly at the federal government, but anywhere that tax dollars are used. And that's particularly true at the state level. It's true in the local government level. So, the range and availability of FOIA or FOIA equivalent at the state level, really anything that you might be interested in. And that's obviously very wide ranging. Maybe, a lot of work that we do is on Russiagate, but we do some other projects from time to time, and FOIA is available. Like I said, whenever there's public dollars, as a general rule, whenever there's public dollars being spent. So maybe at your local level, maybe you're just interested in what your school board's talking about. Maybe they're not giving you a clear answer on something. Maybe you want to have a little bit more insight into what they're discussing, what's going on at the school board, maybe your county commissioner, things like that. So this can be, very high level. I'm going to go FOIA the FBI. Or it could be, what's going on with that vacant lot? Like, what's the plans? What are they going to do with that piece of property? And FOIA is available, and it's there to provide some answers to you. There are some myths, I guess, or some misconceptions about FOIA that I wanted to address, because even to this day, and I think I've produced something over 20,000 pages of documents now. And for sure, there are plenty of productions that I get where there are too many redactions. There are times where I get fully redacted pages, and it's totally outrageous. But I've also shown, and along with some of my friends that do FOIA themselves, we can get documents, and you should be able to get documents that are readable and that are usable. And certainly, even at the state level, you tend to have a little bit more success with that. So don't be nervous about it. And if there's a subject that you're interested in, I encourage you just right now, submit a FOIA. Start the process. The first ones, I'll use myself as an example. First FOIAs that I submitted weren't very good. Now, I didn't know that, and that's not to make you nervous, like, oh, I'm not going to submit a perfect FOIA. There's just things that you're going to pick up, and there's some buzzwords that I can highlight for you, because I made some of these mistakes myself. And particularly at the federal level, FOIA can be a slow process. Per the statute, it's only supposed to take 20 days or 30 days in unusual circumstances. Depending on the agency, it could be much, much slower than that, which is unfortunate. But you can get documents, and depending on the agency and how large it is and how many FOIA requests they get, you may or may not have a little bit more success with that. And as it happens, I'm submitting FOIAs more frequently to places like the FBI, who get a lot of FOIA requests, and they're a little bit slower. Same with the Department of Homeland Security. But if it was more of an obscure federal agency, they tend to be processed a little bit faster, just because they don't get as many FOIA requests. So keep that in mind. And like I said, there are a couple trigger words that I want to highlight. It doesn't mean your FOIA is wrong, but it's something that's going to come with experience. And you're going to be able to gauge whether your FOIA is a good FOIA or whether they have some grounds to deny you, or really to kind of slow things down. Maybe there's going to be more of a back and forth asking you to change your FOIA or narrow it, or give you, an opportunity to select the documents that you're really after. So what do I mean by that? So one of the things that might slip you up is that they may come back and say, well, your request is overbroad and we're going to deny it as overbroad. And there are a couple buzzwords or trigger words that really tend to spur that. So anytime you're asking for any documents or all documents, or your subject matter is a relating to this subject, those tend to be very broad requests. That doesn't make them wrong, but those are trigger words that a FOIA processor is going to look at, and they're going to say, well, any documents, all documents, that's too many documents. I don't want to deal with this. So I'm going to issue a denial, or I'm going to come back to them and say, okay, narrow your request in order for us to process it. Or they might just come back with a crazy high fee of tens of thousands of dollars, which is insane. And that happens from time to time. But there's a couple things. So let's take an example. Now, I'm not personally interested in COVID. I haven't actually submitted any FOIAs relating to COVID or the virus. But let's say you were interested in COVID and you wanted to get a little bit more information. So you submitted a FOIA to the CDC and you said, I want all the documents, all the reports, memorandums, emails, text messages relating to the COVID virus. They're going to look at that, and there's a few buzzwords that they're already going to look at. So all the reports, all the text messages, all the emails. But what they're really going to be tripped up on is the related to. So that becomes very subjective. And when there's subjectivity in a FOIA request, that is something that you cannot win. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you do a broad request and you can get the documents and you can overcome some of those denials even once you understand. But when it comes to processing a FOIA request, anytime there's subjectivity in how a processing of a FOIA would be completed, if there's subjectivity, you're going to lose. And it's right for you to lose. And I'll explain why. So if you said, I want all the documents relating to COVID, that can be what you and I consider relating to a subject is going to differ. And that's a problem. So maybe they're looking at COVID and they're saying, well, okay, do they want all the documents relating to the funding about different research into COVID? Well, that's might be considered related to. But what if it's just health professionals of different states asking for advice from the CDC about what they should be issuing as guidance for themselves? Well, that's relating to as well, right? Well, people may not agree, and they're going to come back and they're ask for a little bit more clarity. Or maybe, to take it to a little bit more of an extreme, maybe somebody might consider research into related viruses, right? Maybe there's a cousin to the COVID virus. Maybe it's, going back to research with a gain of function and everything that was happening in Wuhan before the virus was really out there. It can be very broad. And anytime there's subjectivity where a processor is going to look at this and say, well, I don't know when I'm done because I don't know how many documents might be relating to this subject, you're going to have problems getting a FOIA processed. One way that you can go broad without getting caught up in that, maybe there's a few scientists at the CDC and you just want to know, what are they talking about relating to the COVID virus? So one thing I might like to do in this situation is I'll pick a few targets that I know are interesting to me, that I know are involved in the specific line of research that I'm interested in, and I'll submit a FOIA request and I'll say, I want all the emails to or from this scientist to these 3 or 4 scientists. And that way there's no filter, right? I'm not asking them to look for keywords. I'm not asking them for what's relating to a particular subject. I'm just saying, hey, I want all the emails from these 4 or 5 people sent to or from each other in this specific time frame. And that is a very broad request, but that affords you an opportunity to get documents in a broad way and still have a lot to mine through. And then once you start getting FOIA documents produced, you can start looking through them and you can mine them for more targets of interest. So you're going to have documents swept up in your FOIA production, and you're going to look at them and say, well, that's really interesting. Maybe there's this other third party that you had no idea existed. You had no idea they were working on this subject of interest of yours. Well, you're going to be able to submit another FOIA request, maybe using the same type of system where you're just saying, hey, I want all emails to or from this person now. And once you start submitting 3 or 4 FOIAs, you're going to have a lot more knowledge based on the documents that you start getting, and you're going to be able to submit that much better of a FOIA request. And depending on what the subject matter is, you can get a lot of documents. Like I said, I've gotten probably over 20,000 pages myself, and you never know what's going to come up. There's been so many times where there's a subject that I was interested in, and then all of a sudden something swept in there that if I had used a keyword search, and I'll give you an example. So something that I did a couple of years ago, I partnered up with Margot Cleveland of the Federalist, and we started submitting some open records requests to Georgia Tech. And what we were interested in were a couple cyber researchers that had done some work on the Alpha Bank allegations. And so when I started submitting open records requests, I was primarily thinking I would come up with documents relating to the Alpha Bank matters. But what had started coming up were matters relating to the DNC hack, which was very interesting. I had not expected that. Or data mining, data analytics and collection, and even some intelligence type implications. I had no idea any of those subjects were going to come up. But if I had limited my request and said, I just want all the emails relating to the Alpha Bank matter, it would have produced fewer documents, and that would have been a speedier and probably less expensive request, which is fine if that's what you're after. But if you really want to get documents, you don't want to start limiting your productions to certain keywords, because more and more people are becoming wise to how to evade FOIA. And we saw that there's a couple of emails floating out there about COVID where they're saying, hey, use my personal email addresses so that I don't get FOIA'd. And another example, I know state officials were actually using a different language. And because they used a different language other than English, they were able to evade FOIA. So there are examples out there where government officials really don't want that type of scrutiny. They don't want that transparency. And we can all understand that. But if you really want to get documents, going broad with to or from type emails and not limiting yourself to a subject matter might be the way to go. Now, on the other hand, if you just really want to get documents fast and you're not looking to do a big broad request, maybe you do want to limit yourself to a subject matter. So you might submit a FOIA request that says something like, hey, I just want all the reports, memorandums, or analyses relating to this subject matter that are in this person's account for the date period of January 1 through December 31, something like that. So there's a few different elements that you want to include in your FOIA request. It's really a pretty standard process. You can navigate online. You can pull up many different examples are available online and how to structure it. If you find something from a nonprofit, sometimes that can be a little bit intimidating, because if you see a request that somebody like a Judicial Watch might submit, they're doing citations to the statute, they're doing all this extraneous language. That's really not what you have to do. You don't have to do all these big, flowery FOIA requests. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to do a Google search, and your government agency, you're going to search that name plus FOIA plus open records, and you're going to get a page. There's going to be a web page that tells you how to submit FOIA requests. A lot of government agencies will have a portal, and that means you have to create an account. You're going to submit your request. It's going to take you through, take your personal information. It's going to ask you what your request is. It's going to ask you whether you agree to pay fees. You have the option of requesting a fee waiver. And a point on the fee waiver, fee waivers are generally granted if you can show there is a public interest or a public good in the documents. And our friend FOIA fan, who taught me so much about FOIA and really set me on this path, he has this unique system. So if he's looking at a subject matter, what he will do is he'll do a Google search. He'll do some type of search or a web search, and he'll actually just show all the results. He'll show the number of results relating to that subject matter, and that demonstrates the public interest. So how many web pages are out there? How many people are looking for this subject? And that sort of demonstrates that there is a public interest in that subject matter, because certain government agencies can be a little bit touchy about that. It can really start going back and forth about whether you showed enough to get a fee waiver or not. And some states are a little bit better about that. Some government agencies are a little bit better about that, and some are not, and that's unfortunate. But fee waivers are available if you can show there's a public interest. You may not have to pay anything to get documents, and that I have gotten a few fee waivers. I don't go as far as FOIA fan does. I could do a little bit better myself, but I generally throw together kind of a boilerplate language, right? And I just have a toolkit, and I'll just cut and paste that language. Is pretty high level, pretty generic. And then for me, my personal situation is I'm just content to just leave it out there. So if they give me a fee waiver, I'm happy with it. If they don't give me a fee waiver, for me, that's not a big deal. So I'm happy just to do it quickly, submit my request with a fee waiver request in there. But for me, that it's not too concerning whether it gets granted or not. And lastly, there's going to be a section about expediting a request. You probably are not going to get it expedited. Just being honest with you, in my experience, you have such a high bar to get documents expedited. You basically have to show, really, you almost have to know what's in the documents before you FOIA them, because you have to demonstrate that there's an urgency, that you need to inform the public about the content of the documents. Essentially, you have to know, like, there's harm, there's something out there that you have to address immediately with these documents. If you're an established journalist, I think the way I can describe it, certain journalists seem to get a little bit more leeway. If they're established and the government officials kind of know them, they tend to work with them a little bit better. But expediting documents, that's really, really hard to get those granted. There's been one or two instances where I've ever had FOIA expedited, and it was just because it was in the news, right? Whatever the subject was, I could point to various articles, and but it's probably enough about fee waivers or expediting. I mean, where else to go here? So let's talk about exemptions. So this is something that people are really, really scared of. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. One second. All right, there we go. So I pulled this up. This is just a simple website about FOIA, and this is not the website that I meant to be on. There we go. So let's talk about exemptions. So people are really worried about, particularly with the big federal agencies, about they'll hear the rumors that, oh, you're just going to get big redacted pages. It's a waste of time to even submit a FOIA, and that is not true. So there are 9 exemptions. Some of them are a little bit more frequent, will come up a little bit more frequently. Others are somewhat rare. So exemption 1, information that's classified to protect national security. Exemption 2, information related solely to the personnel rules and practices of an agency. Information that's prohibited by from disclosure by another federal law. This one comes up pretty frequently, particularly as you talk about intelligence matters, anything that would implicate executive order, I think it's 12333, and then exemption 4, trade secrets, commercial or financial information that's confidential or privileged. If there's a government contractor, a private company that has proprietary information or research in this work product that went to a government agency, that might be an example where there might be trade secrets involved. That one doesn't come up too often, but it does come up in there a little bit. Exemption 5, privileged communications within or between agencies. So this is going to be certainly attorney-client privilege, but they also use some really anytime there's interdepartmental communications. This one gets abused, quite honestly. So there are many different projects that start overlapping different government agencies, and they'll have people working on the same subject, but maybe they're assigned to different agencies, and they start invoking this improperly, in my opinion, basically looking for an excuse to withhold documents. And sometimes you'll get very similar documents, and sometimes you'll see that they invoke exemption 5, and then very similar documents, they will not invoke exemption 5. So I recently got a batch where I actually had the pages from Georgia Tech. So I had the full unredacted pages from Georgia Tech. And then when the government agency, in this case, the Department of Defense, actually produced them, they covered certain information with exemption 5 that I already had completely unredacted. And I could see very clearly that exemption 5 was being abused. So that's one to watch for. But again, that's a situation where you kind of have to know what's under the redaction before you can really challenge this one. And that's something that is available, by the way. So if you get a highly redacted document, your first opportunity is going to be to submit an appeal, and you'll be able to go through the appeal process. Now, we'll talk about litigation a little bit later. I'll do a few minutes on litigation because I think that's important. So exemption 6, this is going to be personal privacy information. So there's a little bit of guidance out there about this, but this is primarily, depending on the case law that you're looking at, this is supposed to be like personnel or medical information. That's supposed to be really what this is applied to. Now, in various jurisdictions, that has changed a little bit to be a little bit more broad, but exemption 6 comes up all the time. So you'll see this a lot in documents. You'll see this for a person's email address. If it's a personal email address, this will be the exemption that they cite. If they have a phone number, if they have an address, really any personally identifying information, you'll see exemption 6. That's going to be properly applied. If it's personally identifying information, I'm not going to worry about exemption 6 too much. If you start seeing it elsewhere in non-obvious places where it's just a name, right? It's just somebody. It seems to be just somebody's name that's blocked out. That's probably an improper assertion of this exemption, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into litigation. Exemption 7, information compiled for law enforcement purposes that, and under that we have a few subpoints. But remember this, because this is really important. It's information compiled for law enforcement purposes. So this means this exemption is applied based on the purpose or intent behind the document when it was created. Okay, that's very important. It's compiled for law enforcement purposes. This one gets improperly applied quite often. In my opinion, it all begins and ends with this right here. Was it compiled with the intention that it was going to law enforcement? That is the most important question when it comes to exemption 7. This is going to be the grounds that you're most often going to be able to challenge exemption 7 on, is showing that it was not compiled for law enforcement purposes. It just happened to show up at the law enforcement agency. So keep that in mind, particularly as we talk a little bit more about litigation. 7A, could reasonably be expected to interfere with enforcement proceedings. So maybe there's a trial underway. something like that, 7A might be invoked. 7B would deprive a person of a right to a fair trial or an impartial adjudication. So obviously, if there's a trial underway, something like that, you're not going to get documents before they're introduced in trial. That's basically what they're saying. 7C, this one gets invoked very frequently. Could reasonably be expected to constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Like I said, this gets invoked all the time, but this is subject to a balancing test. And that balancing test is the same one that's actually applied to Exemption 6. And that balancing test in case law basically suggests that the court has to look at the information and say, is there a public interest in this document that would supersede an individual or a third party's right to privacy, to have their names excluded, to have this information excluded? And the courts tend to afford a lot of leeway to the government agencies. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more as I talk briefly, at least, about FOIA litigation. This one's going to show up a lot. Keeping in mind, it's subject to a balancing test. So you have grounds to make an argument. If they invoke 7C, you at least have an argument to make. And you just have to show that it's in the public interest to have this information. 7D, could reasonably be expected to disclose the identity of confidential source. So confidential human sources, they're given protection. Very challenging to challenge this exemption. This is basically open and shut. If there's somebody that's a confidential human source, you have a lot more research to do to even be able to make an argument by this point. 7E, would disclose techniques and procedures for law enforcement investigations or prosecutions, or would disclose guidelines for law enforcement investigations or prosecutions if disclosure could reasonably be expected to risk circumvention of the law. This one is cited somewhat, but they don't generally use this to do big paragraphs or pages of documents. You'll see it show up. In my experience, they have not abused this one per se, but there's a little bit more. So this comes into case law again. So courts, based on my research and the districts and circuits that I'm looking at, would look at this and say it has to be a technique or law enforcement procedure that is not well known. So if the public already knows about that technique or they know about that procedure, the government does not have grounds to withhold that information. It has to be a secret technique. That's what case law holds based on my research. You would obviously need to check the case law in your districts and see what they may hold. But generally, this has to be a secret technique. And then part 2 of this is the disclosure would have to risk presenting a risk that it would avail criminals of an ability to circumvent that technique or that procedure. So wiretapping, something like that. Now, wiretapping is a well-known technique, so 7E would not apply in that context. But on the second point, and this is an or, so the second point is prosecutions, if the disclosure could reasonably be expected to risk circumvention. So if it was a wiretap, if it was not well known that that was a law enforcement technique, then you would look at that and say, well, if they know these phones or the system is being tapped, they wouldn't use it, right? So that would be where circumvention comes in. But it has to be a secret technique and it has to present that risk of circumvention. So this is actually an exemption that's supposed to be really quite limited. But again, you'll have to do your research based on if this is actually cited in what you're looking at. And then 7F, could reasonably be expected to endanger the life or physical safety of any individual. Basically, if they invoke that, you're not getting that. You're not going to be able to argue that. And quite frankly, if it would it endanger somebody's life, you probably don't want to argue that point because you're going to lose points with the judge if you're actually in court. In my opinion, I think you'd lose a little bit of credibility if you're saying, no, I don't think it would endanger his life. We need this information. So Exemption 8, information that concerns the supervision of financial institutions. I've never seen this, have not seen it cited. Exemption 9, geological information on wells. I have not seen that either. So by far the most common are going to be Exemption 5, Exemption 6, and then certain exemptions, subsections of Exemption 7. This is my experience, and obviously I'm submitting FOIAs to the FBI and other government agencies, generally relating to law enforcement type FOIAs. So if you're looking for a COVID type FOIA, or you're looking at your county level is not subject to federal FOIA, but they're going to have exemptions that are somewhat similar to something like this. So the exemptions are going to fluctuate based on the subject matter that you're interested in. And again, at the state or local level, you're going to be under your state laws. You'll have to look those up. And again, it's not anything that you have to be nervous about. So whether you're submitting a FOIA request at the federal level or at your local level, you don't have to have a deep understanding of what the statutes say. At least in my opinion, you don't need to do days and days of research and what's this exemption, what does my open records law provide. They're all generally pretty similar. So if it's supposed to be a public record that relates to the work of a public agency, it's probably a public record. So you don't have to do a whole lot of research. You don't have to be nervous. You can just submit the FOIA, and then it's going to be a learning curve. You're going to get instances where they just hand over the documents, and they're going to get instances where they ask you to clarify your FOIA request or to change or narrow your FOIA request, and you're going to get instances where they maybe misapply exemptions, and it's just going to be a little bit of a learning experience, but it's nothing that you have to be nervous about at all. So that's a little bit about the federal level. Where else did I want to go with this? Okay, yeah. Let's talk about litigation for a little bit. And this is not to scare anybody. You don't have to go into FOIA with the idea that you're going to have to go to court to get documents, because that is not true. But if you want to get a lot of documents, if you're trying to get documents quickly, or anything of that nature, if you're a journalist, if you're you have the resources, and this is not legal advice, by the way, but you have to make the decisions that are right for you. But if you're just an individual out there and you think you might be interested in going the pro se route and representing yourself and taking a government agency to court, it's not that bad, right? So that's another instance where I'm going to say don't be too nervous. What you have to start doing if you think you want to sue a government agency is you have to develop a playbook. And if you're at the point where you think it's appropriate to file a lawsuit to go pursue documents, that's where you have to get a keen understanding of the case law, and you have to get an understanding of the statutory language and whether or not you've exhausted things, whether you've exhausted your administrative remedies. That's going to be the first step. And there's some cases that you really have to get familiar with. So that's going to be a topic for another day. I don't want to get too far into the nitty-gritty details of which cases you really have to know. It's really not something, in my opinion, that you have to be scared about. But remember, the general rule is government agencies have 20 days to produce documents. They have 30 days if there are unusual circumstances. So if 30 days have passed, there's a case ruling out there that actually says you don't have to exhaust any administrative remedies at that point. So if 30 days have passed, and in the case of unusual circumstances, you will have been deemed to have exhausted your administrative remedies. You can sue at 30 days. That's the crux of it, so long as they have not produced any documents to you, right? If your FOIA request is just out there, no documents have been produced, you may have an opportunity to file a lawsuit. And that is not something that you have to be scared about. So when I talk about building a playbook, what you're going to want to do is have a few cases that you can start putting together a complaint letter. So I'm just going to pull these up. I have not looked at these in a long time, but get familiar with Court Listener. You can have a lot of these complaint letters out there. And what I did, this is just me talking about my experience here. When I filed my first lawsuit, and really first couple lawsuits, the first drafts of those, I basically just cobbled them together from 5 or 6 different complaint letters, and they all follow a pretty similar format. So you're going to have your caption, you're going to have, look at your local district. It's going to be different for everybody. This is a very general, high level overview. So you're going to draft this in a Word program. You're going to have something similar to this. It's going to be different. You have to look at your local rules, and this, right? This is not legal advice. I'm not saying go sue, whoever you want. You obviously have to do research and make decisions that are right for you. Consult an attorney if you want to go that route, if you're uncomfortable, things of that nature. I'm just talking about my experience for a bit, and if you can glean anything from that's all the better. So complaint letter, it's going to be something like this, right? This is the District of Columbia. This is going to be pretty standard. This is going to be standard language. You're going to say plaintiff, filed this FOIA lawsuit. These are the records that I'm looking for. Parties. Again, this is going to vary based on your local circuits, but all we're doing here is building a toolkit. So this is the first complaint letter we're looking at. He names the parties, jurisdiction, and venue. Very, very simple, right? Like we can duplicate this. It's not hard. And then we get into the body of what's going on. So plaintiff submitted this FOIA request. This is exactly what I requested. Plaintiff requested expedited processing. DOJ assigned, this is the FOIA request, or the process number, request number. This is what happened. So March 29th, they granted expedited processing, yada, yada. So this is obviously going to be fact specific with what's going on. And then this is just going to go on. So it's going to happen, with dates, this is what happened. This is what didn't happen. They didn't provide the documents, essentially. So back and forth, we're just going through the dates here. Not that hard, right? And then we get to count 1. So this is going to obviously vary, but incorporated herein, they're subject to FOIA. Plaintiff made a FOIA request. Defendants didn't produce documents, right? That's it. That's easy. That's really, really easy. Count 2, they didn't produce the documents, right? And plaintiff asked for relief. That's it. Like that's literally it. It's not that hard to write a complaint letter. And then as a pro se, suing the government, in my experience, it's not been scary, right? There's not been a government attorney where I've been really uncomfortable or anything of that nature. There's been situations that I've been nervous about, right? But in my own experience, I had nothing to be nervous about. It actually moved very smoothly from there. And generally, in my experience, what happens, complaint letter is filed, the government's going to file a response. And then generally, again, this is just my experience, you just basically set a production schedule. And then all of a sudden, you're just reporting to the court whether you comply with that, whether the government comply with that production schedule. And that's essentially it. That's generally my experience with FOIA litigation. Now, there's some nuances, and when exemptions start getting claimed and you feel like you have to fight back and challenge those exemptions and things of that nature, then it gets a little bit more complex. And I'm going through some of that now. But this, if you just wanted to get documents and you don't think there's anything particularly special about them, anybody could do this, right? And the courts are available to everybody. You don't have to be, I think that's something that I'd like to get across. And again, this is not legal advice in any sense of the word, but if you want to get documents and boy, it's been a couple months and you haven't heard anything about your request, they're not producing documents, you can't get an update, maybe this is something that you want to take a look at, and you don't have to be nervous about even going this route, or you can just sit back and submit your FOIA request and look for your documents, and that's perfectly fine. So I'll glance at another one here. So this is actually a really interesting case. So this was one that you might actually want to write this down, because the attorney on this is exceptional, produces a ton of citations that you can throw in your playbook, and you'll have a lot of really good case law to look at. You'll be able to follow some of these filings. And this is a case that did not go smoothly. It's actually still ongoing. And you can actually go through this entire document. And this might, I might be showing you this and it might be discouraging you, like, I don't want to get involved with this. But for those that are really interested in pursuing documents and you think you might have to go the litigation route at some point, you're going to cite this docket. You want to go in here, read through the filings, see what happened, see what happens when things don't go smoothly, see what happens when the government doesn't want to produce documents. And this is Ty Clevenger, an exceptional attorney, very, very good at FOIA, makes some really brilliant arguments, does just tremendous research. I mean, the stuff he comes up with and the citations to other cases, he finds everything. And it's just a wealth of information that you're able to go through. And that's something you're going to want to have in your playbook. So I would definitely recommend looking this up. Court listener, definitely check this out. We'll just look at this complaint letter. It's only 4 pages long, right? This is not bad at all. 4 pages, and it's very similar to the other one that we were just looking at, right? Compel compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. Boom, that's simple enough, right? Jurisdiction and venue, we just saw that, very similar to what we just saw. Venue and jurisdiction. Venue is proper, parties, list them out, very, very easy. Statement of facts, and that's kind of what we were just looking at a minute ago. So I submitted the FOIA request. This is what I requested. Big FOIA request in this instance, and FBI didn't comply. Very simple, right? Here's count 1. Hey, I submitted a FOIA request, they didn't comply. Request for relief, I want them to produce documents, Your Honor. And in this instance, looking for a bond index, and that is invoked when there's going to be responsive records that are withheld with exemptions. That's a tool out there that's going to be something you're going to look into, again, if you happen to go that route. So very, very easy, right? Anybody could do this. And obviously, I'm not telling you to go, sue whoever you want, but you can do enough research that if you want to pursue litigation under FOIA, you can certainly do it, in my opinion. That is, I think, all I wanted to cover as far as litigation. I can talk about, let's talk about state FOIA equivalents a little bit. And I think what I'll do, so we talked about the federal level. Let's talk about state FOIA laws. So they're going to be called sunshine laws. They might be called open records laws. It really depends on the state, but they're all going to be quite similar in language. They're going to say something about, they're going to define what a public record is. Here, let's do this. Let's do this. Share my screen again. All right. So let's pick a state that I'm unfamiliar with their laws. Let's do Oregon. So say you wanted to submit a request to a state agency in Oregon. First thing you should do, open records law. So I'm just Googling Oregon open records law. Okay. So we have a lot of different links, right? And at some point, we probably want to read the actual statute, but I like to just click on the first link, especially when it's a government link like this. A lot of the AG offices at the state level will either link to the statute or they'll give a good summary of the open records law, kind of like this. So who has the right to inspect public records? Anybody, right? That's going to be consistent with many different states. Basically, anybody can submit an open records request. Any corporation, any partnership, so that's not limited to just a person in the state of Oregon. A public body cannot use the public records law to obtain public records from another public body. So that's interesting. So if you have a government body, they can't use the open records law to get documents from another government agency. It's interesting that they felt they had to put that in there. Public official, other than a legislator, person within their official capacity cannot go use the public records law. Boy, what do they have going on in Oregon? They're really worried about that. I haven't seen anything like that in statutory language before for states. That's okay though. All right, so who's subject to the open records law? This is going to be really consistent. There's going to be, statutory language out there for your specific state. It's probably going to be very similar to this, and it's going to find, who's subject to the law. So it applies to any public body in this state, and it goes on to define it, right? Every state officer, agency, department, division, bureau, board and commission, every county, city governing body, school district, special district, municipal corporation, any board, department, commission, council, or agency thereof, and any other public agency of this state. So everybody. That's a pretty clear definition, right? Basically, any state agency, public funds are involved, you can expect that they're going to be subject to the public records law in the state of Oregon. So that's good to know. Let's look. Let's see. Okay, so this is an interesting point. Generally, legislative records are public records subject to inspection. So this is not necessarily a common records are not considered public records. So keep that in mind. And There we go. Am I back? I hope I'm back. All right, let's get resituated here. Sorry about that, folks. I think we just had the stream cut out, stream crash for about 15 minutes, I think. So I think I'm back on. That was unfortunate. Not sure what happened there, but stream crashed. So hopefully we can find where I left off and we will finish this one up. So give me just a few seconds here. Try to get situated. Just trying to reopen some pages here. All right, where are we? Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where the stream crashed, where I was. So I think I'm going to kind of restart with where I was, and that was we had just pulled up the Oregon Open Records Law just as an example in talking about how to look at your state's open records law. And this was just going to be an example that we used. And hopefully everybody stuck around. Looks like everybody did. So that is good. I appreciate it. And we're going to pick up hopefully close to where we left off. And as I was saying before the stream crashed, basically you're going to have something, all the open records laws for the states are typically quite similar. And you can look at the various statutory languages that are used, but there's going to be write-ups similar to this. A lot of attorney general's websites for the states will have a section on the open records laws. So this is a good guidance that makes it a little bit more accessible than digging into the statute yourself. So this is going to be a good resource. So let's pretend, as we were, that we just want to look at the Oregon Open Records Law. And as I was saying, basically anybody can request a public record in the state of Oregon. And then section 2, we were talking about who is subject to the public records law. And hopefully it made it on the stream where I was talking about basically everybody is a public body, right? Every government body, every state office is going to be subject to this law. And then we got to this section, and I think this is close to where the stream might have cut out. And what I was trying to say was that this is something that is somewhat unique, and I thought this was pretty interesting for the state of Oregon. So they actually have legislative records are public records subject to inspection, and that is fairly unique among state laws. There are a lot of states out there where legislative records are not considered public records. So this is going to be an example of something that you're going to have to look at for your state or your state of interest as to what constitutes a public record. And legislative records may or may not be defined as public records. There is a little bit of limitation here. You'll just have to, see if your state of interest has any limitations on this. And then court records, similarly, court records, that does vary quite a bit from state to state. So here, court records are generally public records subject to inspection. So again, that is not true of every state. And you're just going to have to check your state and see whether that is the case. Private bodies. This was pretty interesting. And I think I started reading this and I noticed that the stream was down. So this is pretty interesting. In the state of Oregon, the public records law does not apply to private entities such as nonprofit corporations and cooperatives. However, this is really important for the state of Oregon. However, if the ostensibly private entity is a functional equivalent of a public body, the public records law applies to it. That's huge. That's a really good feature of an open records law for the state of Oregon. So kudos to Oregon. That is really strong to have in there with their open records law. So this is not true of a lot of states. If it's the functional equivalent of a public body, the public records law applies to it. So I imagine there's quite a bit of case law you'd have to dig into to see, but there's a few factors that they go ahead and define here. And it's going to depend, whether it's a functional equivalent depends on the entity's character and its relationship with government and government decision making. The following factors are usually relevant in making this determination: the entity's origin, whether it was created by government or created independently, the nature of the functions assigned and performed by the entity. Are these functions traditionally performed by the government, or are they commonly performed by an entity, right? And that goes to the question of, whether it's the functional equivalent of a public body, of a government body, right? Are they doing a function that a government body would otherwise be doing? And then third factor is the scope of the authority granted to and exercised by the entity. Does have the authority to make binding decisions. The nature and level of any governmental or financial or non-financial support, the scope of government control over the entity, and the status of the officers and employees. Are they public employees? So that's a good open records law. I like that a lot for Oregon. There are a few states that have something similar, but in a lot of states, you don't have a strong open records law like this. This is good. Let's see what else we have here. What records are covered by the law? This is going to be consistent with a lot of states. They're going to have a definition of what is a public record. So any writing that contains information relating to the conduct of the public's business, including but not limited to court records, mortgages and deed records, prepared, owned, used, or retained by a public body, regardless of physical form or characteristics. Don't really like that definition. I think that could be better. They say, despite this broad definition, not all public records are available for inspection from the public laws. Well, that's not really a good definition. I don't like that. Let's see what else. All right, so they're just going to talk quite a bit more about what is a public record. Going to go on to define some of the language that was used in the statutory language, and that's all fine. So here's where it goes into how do you make a request. And for your state or your locality, they're going to have something like this. They're going to tell you how you can make a request. So that might involve a government portal system, but it's more likely, particularly for a state or local entity, it's going to involve sending an email to somebody. But there's a few pieces of information that we're going to look for, and you would look for your state or locality, and that is, how long does the government have to respond to requests or to produce documents? So let's start looking for that. Public body's legal obligation to respond to a public records request is triggered by the receipt of a written request. So that's important, right? So if you send an email on a Saturday, that does not start the clock. Right, it's going to be the following Monday or the following business day that they're in operation when it's actually received or deemed received, that clock is going to start. So let's see here. How many days did they get? That's what I'm looking for. All right, so let's keep reading and see how many days they'll have to respond. This is good. This is a good section. You'll want to note this for later. So records custodian. This is I haven't read this before, but this will define the obligations of custodian. I'm actually going through something that kind of relates to this right now, so this is a little bit funny, but each custodian is responsible for responding to public records requests directed to it. That is pretty interesting. That is really important, actually, because things can get complicated. A public body is not the custodian of a record. that it possesses as an agent for another public body. So obviously, read through that. Make sure you understand and have a clear understanding of what the obligations are for the custodian and or for the government agency. Make sure you're clear on that. So acknowledging a request. This is going to talk about starting the clock. Once a public request is received, public body must acknowledge receipt within 5 business days unless the request is fulfilled by them. So that's pretty good. That's pretty standard. They have 5 days to acknowledge the receipt, and they have to acknowledge the receipt. That is in the statutory language, so that's good. In certain circumstances, the public body is excused from this 5 business day deadline, but they have to do so pretty much immediately. Let's see. Completing the response. Here we go. So once a public employee identified in a public body's request, yada yada. How quickly a public body should be able to complete a request under the standard depends on various factors, including the specificity of the request, the volume of records requested, the amount of exempt material, and the ease in determining whether any of the records are exempt from disclosure. In most cases, it should be possible to complete the response within 10 business days. However, in some cases, more time, even significantly more time, may be required. Okay, the law establishes a baseline expectation that public bodies will complete their responses no later than 15 business days after receiving the request. So this is a little bit of nuance here. So this is obviously just the AG website describing the law. And this might be important to actually go to the statutory language and actually read what it says, because they're talking about expectations and what is considered reasonable and things of that nature. So you want to be really clear about what the statutory language actually is. So it sounds like they have 15 business days to complete their response. A public body unable to meet the 15 business day deadline must notify the requester in writing that the request is still being processed and provide the requester with a reasonable estimated date of completion. So that's pretty good. You have to comply with it, and otherwise you have to tell them when you expect to comply. So that is good. On the whole, this seems to be a pretty good open records law, I have to be honest. 15 business day is suspended. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of nuances, obviously, right? There's going to be exceptions. Just reading through this here. All right, so all that to say, okay, let's talk about fees real quick. So public body is authorized to establish fees reasonably calculated to reimburse it for the actual cost of making public records available. That's not particularly good for us. Actual costs can be quite expensive. This includes the cost for summarizing, compiling, or tailoring the public records, either in organization or in media, to meet the public's request. Let's see. Actual cost may include a charge for the time spent by the public body staff in locating the records, reviewing the records to redact exempt material, supervising a person's inspection of original documents. Public bodies may charge for search time, even if they fail to locate any records responsive to the request. That's interesting. That, in my experience, even if they have the authority to charge you, usually they don't. If there's no responsive records, that actually just creates a little bit more paperwork for them, and it's usually not a whole lot of time that they spend searching for documents, depending on what you're looking for. What else here? Okay, so as far as fee requests for the state of Oregon, this is not ideal. I mean, ideally, they would actually cap it at an hourly rate, maybe $25 an hour, or it would have statutory language that would say, well, you have to use the lowest paid employee to process the request. That's pretty common. This is fairly common too, that to actually have in the statutory language that they can charge fees to reasonably calculated to reimburse it for the actual cost. So the reason that becomes an issue is there are a few examples of, I don't know if I would call them bad actors, but there are instances where I've had institutions tell me that they needed the university attorney to review every page for redaction, to review every single page of, in that instance, 4,000 page productions, to review every page for exemptions. And that was an attorney that was paid a couple $100,000 a year. So the fee estimates were pretty outrageous. Now, in that instance, I actually took that attorney to an administrative board hearing. And that's another point that I wanted to raise. So if you get into a dispute, you don't necessarily have to automatically sue a state agency to address things like a crazy fee estimate or something like that. There are certain states out there that have sort of mediation boards or administrative boards where you can file a complaint, basically, just that, complaining about, whatever the issue is. Maybe it's a crazy fee estimate. Maybe they just haven't produced documents. They refuse to respond to you, things of that nature that really warrant some person in authority to come in and say, what's going on. There are states that have entities like that available. And get a little bit off track here, but in that particular instance, I went that route, and an attorney, a really well-experienced attorney who really didn't want to deviate, didn't want to cave in, I beat her. I beat her pretty bad, actually. And instead of her reviewing every single page and doing every minute of review and redaction, she was told that she did not have that authority. She could not do that. So the laws are generally on the side of the requester. It's much easier to win than you're thinking. And as I said at the outset of this, you don't have to be nervous about FOIA. You don't have to be worried about the open records law. And particularly as you get a little bit of experience and a little bit of knowledge into what you're doing, you can start pushing back a little bit. And particularly when you can cite statutory case law and the statutory language, and make a case, make a well-reasoned, well-argued case. A lot of judges and a lot of officials or people out there, they're going to side with you. The intent of these laws, and a lot of laws will say this, the intent of the laws is to make these documents available, to lift the veil of secrecy and open the agency to the light of scrutiny, right? That is the intent. That's the stated intent in a lot of instances. So keep that in mind. It's not that hard to win. And in that instance, that dramatically reduced the fee estimate. So there are examples out there where that state agency or that agency might, give you a scary fee estimate. But if you can push back a little bit, if you can haggle a little bit, and as long as you're reasonable, you can generally come to a compromise. So don't be scared, and certainly do a little bit of research if it comes to that. But more often than not, the fees are very reasonable. Generally, you're not paying, we're not talking about thousands of dollars for requests. That's very, very rare. So don't be scared, and certainly put in your FOIA requests, anything that you're interested in. And like I said earlier, it's been a while because the stream dropped, but this can be anything, right? It might be FBI records, really, broad, maybe a case that you have no relation to, you're just interested in. Maybe this is a school board, and you're just curious, what is the school board doing about this issue? What are they saying about this issue? Or a county commissioner, or, your governor's office, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're worried about, what are they doing about, illegal immigrants? Are they bringing illegal immigrants in? Are they giving them, some of those debit cards like New York is? Maybe you just want more information on that. Well, you can submit FOIA requests for that, and you can see, what are they saying about that issue? And so It's really, really powerful. So this was just an example, right? We just went through Oregon, and basically all I intended to do here is to show you how to start doing a little bit of research, how to educate yourself about, some of this, about how to submit a request. Now, unless you really anticipate, a frustrating battle, you generally don't have to read all this. I mean, this is not a prerequisite to go submit a open records request. You just have to know how to submit it. And generally, if you're just asking for documents and you have the standard language or an example that you can tailor to your specific request, it's going to go really, really smoothly. And the time that you really have to start looking at this is where you're saying, well, I might have to sue them, right? I might have to compel compliance with the law. They're not handing over documents or what have you. This is really, where this is going to come into play. And I'm not saying don't read it, right? If you want to spend a couple hours reading the statutory language or a website like this that kind of gives you a more friendly version of what your open records law is, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, I'm not discouraging anybody from that, but this is basically how you get to the information, right? This is simple Google search. All I did was type in Oregon open records law, boom, clicked on the first link that popped up. This tells me everything I need to know. Anybody can submit a request, every public body, what types of records, pretty broad, right? You might want to read a little bit more about what's a public record in the state of Oregon. There's a lot of information here that you can read through. This tells you how to submit an open records request, and there's information here about how long they have to respond to you, to acknowledge it, how long they have to complete it, 15 business days, except in exceptional circumstances. Here's the exceptions, and then they're going to talk about fees, right? So that's all information is going to be there and available to you. In very short order, you can learn about your open records law and have the background necessary to submit your open records request. And as far as actually submitting a request, let's say we wanted to submit a request to the AG office itself, right? So in that case, I would have put something like Oregon Attorney General open records request. And I probably would have come to a website similar to this. So, this might have been the first one up. So I'm just going to go to public records and request DOJ public records. Boom. Now in this instance, this is a good point actually. Search public records orders. So a lot of AG offices will put out something like this. And I'm just freewheeling here, so I have no idea what this is. Let's see here. All right, well, there's a lot of information. So that's the risk that you take when you're live streaming. I don't know what all this is, so I'm not going to read through it. So going back to our example, let's just say the Attorney General was the office that we were interested in getting documents from. So like I said, I searched Open Records Officer or Open Records AG, Oregon. So I want to submit an Oregon DOJ public records request. Obviously, I'm going to click this link, but this is pretty important, right? So they actually tell you how much they're going to charge, and this isn't too good, but we don't have to be too discouraged just yet. So it really is going to come down to the types of records. Now, AG offices in general, they're going to have a lot more review for things like attorney-client privilege, and a lot of other government agencies would not have a need for that type of intensive review. So don't be discouraged when you see these high rates. So the assistant AG, $143 an hour, that's very, very high. We don't see that very often. $79 for a paralegal, that's very high. We don't see that very often. $108 an hour for an investigator, that is exceptionally rare. Law clerk at $39 an hour, and general clerical at $47. Hopefully, these are the individuals doing the bulk of the work. This person might have half an hour just doing a email search, and compiling the information, and then generally they might send it off to somebody like this, and they start actually processing the records, applying the exemptions, and then maybe flagging a few specific documents for, a lawyer to review in this instance. And this is really probably just because it's the AG office. There's a lot of risk here, right? You don't want to send out documents that should have been exempted that weren't. So would not necessarily expect a lot of hours for the assistant AG, but I could not guess. It really depends on what your FOIA request might be. So in this instance, I'm just going to click request, and very, very, very consistent with what my experience has been all across the country. So in this instance, there's going to be a form here. You can certainly just submit the form, or you can submit an email. And depending on how many requests you do, it might dictate which method you choose. You can mail it in. Obviously, you can fax it in. I personally like to opt for emails when I have the option of doing so, because then it makes it a lot easier to track it. When I fire off a form like this or a portal, that means I usually have to go log into a portal, or I don't have the visibility anymore. So if I remember, hey, I submitted that Oregon DOJ FOIA, then how long ago was that? They only have 15 business days to complete the request. When did I submit that request? I like to be able to pull up my email and just say, oh, I sent it, 13 business days ago. They have a couple more days or something like that. So I generally opt for email, but this is going to be really similar for a lot of forms out there. You're going to put in your information. You're going to put in your request. If you're seeking a fee waiver, tell us how it benefits the general public. And that's as easy as it is. It's really, really not too hard at all. And I think that's enough. I think that's enough an example of we were just interested in Oregon, their open records law, so we went through that example. Obviously, it's going to be fact specific for what your area of interest is. Boy, I have a lot of people on the stream. Appreciate everybody hopping on here. Let's see, comments. Cindy asks, I'm having problems. All right. Cindy has a comment here, and she says, I'm having problems getting information a school board deems confidential, looking for next steps. So obviously, might need a little bit more information than that, but it really depends, right? You have to read the local rules concerning that information. What do they consider public records? Things like schools could implicate student record privilege is really, really common. So if it's going to be related to a specific student, there are laws that govern the protection of student records. Those are pretty widespread. So if it implicates something like that, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble getting information that you might want. But if you're just interested in what the school board is discussing about a particular issue or general topic, or maybe it's something like, there's a lot of discussion about certain books that are out there, things like genderqueer or something like that. Maybe you just want to submit a FOIA request for their emails going to or from one another. And if I was interested in what school board was discussing, obviously there should be minutes available for that school board, and you can pull up the minutes or actually attend the meetings and see what they're discussing in public. But generally, school boards are going to be subject to open records laws, and you could submit an open records request for any emails to or from a school board member or multiple school board members to other school board members, right? And that would give you a lot of context on, what are they saying behind the scenes, right? Where they really feel about what that issue might be. And that might be the route that I might go to a situation like that. So hope that helps. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to get into? No, I think that's it. Like I said, I like to try to do this every 6 months to a year. I found that there are a handful of people that have actually went out and started submitting FOIA requests and still submit FOIA requests to this day after I did a couple of these. So I thought that was great, and that motivates me to keep doing stuff like this. So hopefully you found something useful. I'm sorry that the stream dropped out there for like 15 minutes. We had a good crowd. I think it just got overloaded maybe, or I don't really know what happened. So I will certainly do more of these in the future. I'd like to grab FOIA Fan at some point and maybe get to a few examples of different situations that we've experienced. At some point, I'm going to do one specific to Georgia, just because I have a lot of personal knowledge about Georgia. As far as the federal FOIA laws, I might have something like an associate's degree working on a bachelor's degree, metaphorically, but as far as Georgia's open records law, I basically have a doctorate. I know so much about Georgia, which is fairly esoteric as far as open records laws and everything go, and it's not going to be for everybody. But at some point in the future, I will share that knowledge that has been pretty expensive and hard won to get. So I will certainly do a future broadcast on that. Like I said, I'll put something together with FOIA Fan at some point, and hopefully you found this enjoyable and useful. Like I said, like I've emphasized throughout the stream, don't be afraid to submit a FOIA request or an open records request. Whatever your subject of interest in, I strongly urge you, just go submit it, right? You don't have to do a whole lot of research as long as you understand the basics. So pull up a few examples of how to word a FOIA request, use some of the pointers that hopefully we covered in the stream today, and just see what happens. It's a learning experience. Just dive into it, and it's not that hard to get documents. You can get documents. There are not that many instances where they're going to be just blank pages. So just go out and do it and have fun with it. So I'm going to end the stream here. I appreciate everybody sticking around after the stream dropped out. Hopefully you had fun, and I will see you again later. Have a good night.